Well, are you ready to learn all about how to calm an angry person in just 90 seconds or less? That's what our next guest speaker brings to us. Attorney, mediator, innovator, peacekeeper, author, Doug Noll. Doug has an extensive background as a lawyer, a litigator, and after about 20 years, he said, you know what? I think I'm done. He'd been highly successful in all kinds of cases, and yet felt a need. It was actually an injury that caused him to get into yoga and various alternative sports and exercise that really trained him to calm his mindset. And so with that, Doug has been proliferous in terms of what he's done. He has now taken his work, his thinking, his writings into the area of prisons and made significant success in turning around the world of our inmates and helping them learn how to resolve conflict. Now, what a better place to start. But he's not just stop there. He has also gone on to develop programs for principals and administrators of schools throughout the United States to help them better manage, deal, and equip their staff for conflict. And certainly, we know that we need it. Doug is a very distinguished individual in that he is an Encore Fellow in 2014 for the Prison of Peace Project. He was also honored as California Lawyer Magazine, as California Attorneys of the Year in 2012 for the Pro Bono Prison of Peace Project. And he's the creator of Negotiation Mastery for the Legal Pro, an online legal negotiation training course. And his abilities go on and on. I'm just so excited. He has such an insight and an acclaimed author. He's author of Sex, Politics, and Religion in the Office. Now, who doesn't want to deal with that? And also practicing at the intersection of law and human conflict. That's definitely true and dear to my heart because I actively work in helping people make peace and learn how to have conversations, not confrontations. And so with no further ado, I want to bring to you Doug Noll. He has so much to say. Please stay and listen and learn. Welcome to Decoding the Conflict Mindset. Hi, I'm Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, and the host of this week's episode. I'm so delighted to bring to our guests and viewers Doug Noll. And Doug has a fascinating topic of specialty, how to calm any angry person in just 90 seconds or less. And I think probably a lot of people are going to want to hear about that, Doug. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Deborah. It's great to be here.
Well, great. When we met each other and I saw more about what you're doing, I thought, oh man, we're really sort of on the same wavelength, shall we say, when we talk about de-escalating emotion, the words we use and things like that. And so I'm excited to dive more into that. With that, Doug, I've gone through your bio. Our viewers just heard a little bit more about you before this show actually started. And, I was particularly intrigued with your book as author of Sex, Politics, and Religion at the Office. And so I know you've got a lot of story to unpack there. And so let's get started right there. So, because people tend to connect when they have an idea of where have you come from and what's motivated you to do what you're doing today. So first of all, how did you get into law?
Well, I grew up in Southern California and had a lot of disabilities as a child, but I had a really good mind. And I matriculated to Dartmouth College and in the late 60s and early 70s. And in those days, if you didn't go to med school from an Ivy League college, you went to law school. So I didn't go to med school. I came back to California and went to law school. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to practice law or not, but I knew that getting a legal education would further the development of my mind, my critical thinking skills. And it sort of defaulted from there. I did really well in law school, ended up working for a judge as a law clerk for a year, and then entered private practice as a young associate in Central California. And the firm groomed me to be a big-time trial lawyer, so much so that, I joined the firm in September of 1978 and tried my first jury trial in November of 1978, civil jury trial.
Ooh.
That's unheard of.
Wow.
My second jury trial was 2 months later. It was defending a $36 million securities fraud case in the Southern District of California, the federal court in San Diego. So I spent 7 months in San Diego. Hadn't even been with the firm 6 months. And here I was trying these big-time cases. So that's how my career started. And I sort of defaulted into it. I didn't have a burning desire to be a trial lawyer, but it just happened. And, I got, for the first 4 or 5 years, I wasn't sure whether this is what I really want to do. But then finally I just said, well, if I'm going to do this, I might as well get really good at it. And so I did. And for 22 years, that's what I did. I tried cases. And I was very good at what I did. I lost very few cases. Won most everything. I either won or got good settlements for my clients. That was the first part of my life.
Wow. Well, it's sort of interesting about, and my viewers have heard this from me before, is that how some things from our childhoods oftentimes propel us into certain directions.
Oh yeah.
And so, you know, you had a good mind and you very actively used it. And I probably should give a disclaimer here, Doug. Not everybody rockets into their law career like you did.
No, it was very unusual. Most of my peers were in law libraries for 10 years before they even saw the inside of a courtroom. I was inside of a courtroom my first week in the firm. They had me doing law and motion calendars. So, I mean, they put me into an accelerated development program.
I guess.
And, you know, that was good. And I was smart and I learned fast and did well. So yeah, I had a very different career trajectory than most other lawyers of my generation.
Okay. Yeah, I certainly, I mean, I know many lawyers throughout my years of my profession and work actively with lawyers and mediators today. And so it is uncommon for that kind of trajectory, as you said.
Right.
And I'm curious, you know, well, I think a lot of law school students, you know, live in this world of litigation and being in court, but the reality is a lot of people never really quite see that.
No, I actually really enjoyed trying cases. I hated the rest of the practice. The rest of the practice I hated. I just despised it, but I loved being in the courtroom. And that was a very small percentage of the work that I did. You know, your work, being a trial lawyer, a civil trial lawyer, is really hard work. I turned 72 in a couple of days, and I look at my colleagues, and they're all burned out husks, and many of them are dead. Mm-hmm. I would never recommend. I would recommend law school to a person, but not to become a lawyer. At least not a trial lawyer. It's a horrible way to make a living.
It's a rough pathway. Yep.
Really rough. I mean, a 60-hour week is a light week.
Yeah, no, I know. Having been married to a lawyer, I will remember those hours of toil and hard work. So I'm curious, you know, because, you know, that's how you got into law. But, you know, again, given your background, I mean, a lot of distinguished awards and things like that. I mean, even a second-degree black belt in Chinese Kung Fu, and you've taught Tai Chi. I mean, I imagine those kinds of things kept your mind and your body centered through all those years of litigation.
Right, and it was that vocation that led me out of litigation and into peacemaking.
Okay. So say more about that, because I was just going to ask you to elaborate more on that transition, because not everybody gets there, and yet that shift is really important, I think, for people to understand about being aware of opportunities. I like to say out of adversity comes opportunity. Right. And so we have to be mindful about how we do that. So say a little bit more about how your mindset was influenced and shifted.
So I took up the martial arts in, I think, 1984, 85 for a couple of reasons. One, I've always been interested in martial arts. Two, because I was born crippled, I wanted to see what I could do, and because I have a atrophied left leg. And three, at the time I was a ski instructor, part-time ski instructor, and I was working on my final level of certification, and I wasn't able to pass my skiing exam because I wasn't strong enough. So I thought that if I started cross-training with martial arts, that might help me. And in fact, it did. And I did pass the exam. Ultimately, I earned my secondary black belt right around when I turned 40. And my teacher basically told me he's not teaching me anymore until I learn Tai Chi, master Tai Chi. So that got me into Tai Chi. And Tai Chi, I studied Tai Chi as a martial art, not as a contemplative practice. And it's an extremely violent, vicious martial art. It doesn't look that way, but believe me, it is really brutal. But Tai Chi has two really interesting paradoxes. The softer you are, the stronger you are. The more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Well, this was completely the opposite of the mindset that I'd had both as a trial lawyer and as a secondary black belt. And it took me a while, but eventually those paradoxes were absorbed into me, and I began to understand them and experience soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. And when you get to that point in Tai Chi, all of a sudden, the power of Tai Chi becomes so obvious. And it's scary how powerful it is when you learn these paradoxes. I'll never forget the time I threw a person 40 feet across the room with just my fingertips, just like that. You see the cartoon thing with people bent over and hitting a wall? That's what happened. That's how much power there is in this stuff. Yeah. So, but that led to a complete shift, because one day, not long, well, in the mid-late 90s, I was trying a case, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And all that work that I'd done with Tai Chi and everything else finally got me to the place of recognizing that my calling was not to be a trial lawyer. It was to do something else. And that's how and then from there, right after that trial, I went on a vacation. I went on a whitewater trip with a bunch of friends, and I spent 10 days on the main salmon up in Idaho, all by myself in my wrap, thinking about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer. And I could only count 5 people over 22 years that I felt that I'd really served as a lawyer. And I decided I didn't want to go another 20 or 30 years and only serve 15 or 20 people. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I came back to town after that trip and drove down out of the mountains to my office and heard what turned out to be the one and only public service announcement for a new master's degree program in peacemaking and conflict studies offered at Fresno Pacific University, which is one of the West Coast Mennonite schools. I'm not a Mennonite, but the Mennonites are one of the 3 traditional Protestant peace churches. Mm-hmm. So ultimately I enrolled. And in 1997, I was a full-time master's degree student carrying 10 units per semester, a 3/4 time law professor teaching 2 or 3 classes at our local law school, and a full-time trial lawyer. And for the next 4 years, it was pretty nutty, not a lot of sleep. But what happened was I was trained, you've heard of restorative justice. Well, the international restorative justice movement started at Fresno Pacific University. That's where the whole thing began.
Okay.
I was trained by the people who started that movement. And they were brilliant. And I was trained by some of the brightest minds in the field about the broad concepts around peace and conflict
Mm-hmm.
studies.
Mm-hmm.
And it completely shifted my perspective about what could be done in the world. And instead of litigating and fighting, there were so many pathways to help people find peace. And so what happened then was I started having discussions with my partners about changing my practice. They were absolutely horrified at the idea of me becoming a peacemaker because I was the 2nd largest earner in the firm. All of a sudden, their golden goose was going to stop laying the golden eggs, and very unhappy people. And ultimately, the managing partner gave me an ultimatum in October of 2000 and said, if you don't stop this peacemaking crap, you're not getting paid anymore, which he had no right to do, of course. But it was an ultimatum, and I thought about it. And I walked in that was on a Friday afternoon, and on Monday morning, I walked in and I said, I quit. I handed my credit card, my phone, everything. And I said, I'm out of here on Friday. Nobody could believe that I was just walking out,
right,
leaving $10 million on the table, put more money into the firm that I'd taken out. And I walked away from it all and started my own peacemaking practice in November of 2000.
That's a really remarkable story. And, it's just, I find it so intriguing to, those moments of clarity, shall we say, because we can be working really hard and really successful, and yet it's all with a lot of smoke about what's really important, what do you really value, what do you care about, and how it impacts you as an individual. That shift for you is not unlike, you have your own unique story, but that shift for you is not unlike the 12 professional, lawyer mediators that I interviewed during the pandemic and have a series on that. As far as what's the shift, how has that shift, transformed you? Because it is a shift in mindset from being a lawyer, a litigator, to being a peacemaker, a mediator. I'm curious, and you certainly reflect that. And so I'm curious, how that shift then impacted you personally in terms of your sense of self, your sense of life, your relationships around you.
Well, just because I decided to be a peacemaker and had a master's degree and a graduate dean's award from the university because I did so well, didn't mean that I was really going to be a peacemaker. I mean, I had a lot of things, my own stuff I had to work on. I was emotionally really wounded as a child, not intentionally, but just as a result of the era that I grew up in and all my disabilities. And I'd covered that all up with arrogance. And I really had to learn how to get out of the competitive adversarial trial mode and stop looking at conflicts as adversarial gladiator type fights and shift my mind. And that took some time to do that. The big breakthrough for me was a discovery that I made in 2005, which completely changed my life. And that discovery was how to calm an angry person almost instantly. And it was by happenstance that I stumbled on it. And once I started developing that skill, I started to develop my emotional competency. You can't help yourself. I've now learned, having trained so many thousands and thousands of people in these skills, that when you start learning how to do these, what I call the deep skills, the de-escalating emotional people skills, that it reprograms your own brain. So it's more beneficial to you as the listener than it is to the speaker whom you're calming down. And then 2 years after that discovery, a seminal study out of Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA was a brain scanning study, showed exactly what happens in the brain when you engage in this process known as affect labeling. So now I have the science to support the discovery that I'd made. And I started teaching it all over the world, Dubai and Amsterdam, all kinds of places, and with great success. People found the word that people universally used was, this was magic. The way that it calmed people down. And then in 2010, my dear friend and colleague Laurel Coffer and I founded the Prison of Peace Project. It started with 15 women serving life and long-term sentences in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world, which was at that time Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. And the very first set of skills we taught them were these de-escalation skills. We we're going to train them to be mediators and peacemakers, but we had to start by teaching them a couple of dozen foundational skills before they could learn how to mediate a case, mediate a dispute. And it was that the culmination that from the discovery in 2005 to starting the prison work in 2010, where the big shifts inside myself began to take place.
Fascinating. As you know, I'm very much into the neuroscience of the brain and how we can shift it in, that's why I talk about mindset shift and decoding the conflict mindset, because if we know what to look for and what to do, then we can really transform the moment. And so there's two questions I have for you. I know that you, in your writings, you talk about we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. Say more about that.
So we live in a society that has been fed a lie for 4,000 years. Philosophers and theologians have taught us that what makes humans human, the basic human nature, is our ability to reason, to be rational. Plato said this, Aristotle said it, Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, he's the guy that wrote the Catholic theology, which is not Christian, by the way, it's Neoplatonist, which is always very interesting to me.
Whole other topic, so we'll come back to that.
The only way you can get to prison, the only way you can get to prison, the only way you can get to heaven is through reason. And oh, by the way, women can't reason. And of course, that led to a huge, I don't want to get off on Augustine, but a whole bunch of stuff that he wrote that has caused more misery in the centuries since than you can possibly imagine. But then you get to Kant, German philosopher, same thing. Emotions are bad, reason is good. So we've got this whole philosophical societal structure that says what separates us from other animals is reason. Totally not true. What neuroscience has demonstrated in the last 20 years is that we are totally emotional beings. And really what separates us from other species is our emotions. Other animals don't have emotions. Only humans have emotions. And I know people get a lot of pushback on that. Well, what about my dog or my cat? No, they don't have emotions. They have affect, which is, they're very different. I don't have time in our talk to go into all the science of all this.
Right. Well, that will be another talk, Doug, because that's fascinating.
That there are some contra-normative insights that we gain from science. One, we're 98% emotional, 2% rational. Two, we're not born with emotions. We're born with affect, and we have to learn how to construct emotions. Emotions are cognitive constructs that have to be learned, and they're culturally derived. So if you want the true definition of culture, it's not about your color of your skin or the community you're in. It's about what is the emotional language that your culture uses, because that defines the culture. So we're 98% emotional. That means that everything we do is emotional. We can't make a decision without being emotional first. You can't use rationality unless you're emotional first. Rationality never tells you there's a problem out there. Rationality, critical thinking, analytical reasoning, all those are tools to solve a problem. But how would you even know the problem existed unless you had an emotional reaction to your environment that told you that here's something I've got to pay attention to?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. One of the drivers for people in conflict is that something is very important to them that's not happening, or they're not getting. It's emotion. Absolutely.
All conflict is emotion. There's no such thing as an unemotional conflict.
Yes, absolutely.
And as I teach my graduate students, never try to solve an emotional problem with logic. It doesn't work. You've got to solve emotional problems with emotional tools.
Well, back in my day of going to graduate school, like you, I have a story, my family dynamics and my family-owned business dynamics largely influenced my fascination with human dynamics, because of, so many broken hearts, damaged relationships, and dashed dreams. And so when I had my first psychology class, I was absolutely fascinated. And, back in those days, a long time ago, we didn't know all this stuff that we do today around neuroscience. And so I was drawn towards cognitive behavioral therapy. But over the years, because I've always been a very part-time practicing psychologist, but mostly a mediator, I was frustrated by how much people relapse. Yes, we can change our cognitions and influence our behaviors, but as soon as that emotional moment happens, they're right back to their natural emotional reaction. And so what has emerged, with the neuroscience field is emotion-focused therapy. Emotions precede all cognitions. You just said that a moment ago. Yeah. And so it really is paying attention. And I know you mentioned vulnerable earlier, and a lot of people are very afraid of being vulnerable.
Well, and for good reason. I mean, almost every child, at least in Western culture, by the time they become 6 or 7 years old, they realize they live in an emotionally unsafe environment. About 6 or 7, the child starts to develop agency, the ability to think for themselves and make decisions. And all of a sudden, mom and dad have this little creature in their household they love, but is no longer the little darling baby.
Yeah.
Who's so cute. Now we've got a being who's developing agency and can think and be stubborn and say no. And all of a sudden it's not so cute anymore. And so mom and dad now have to deal with this emotional child. And what do? They invalidate.
Okay.
Right.
Which takes us into my next question then, is that, you do talk about emotional invalidation,
Right.
and you refer to it as the first deadly sin. So
It is.
perfect segue. Go there.
Yeah. So we are emotionally invalidated as children, really starting around 2 or 3. And we're told all kinds of things. But don't cry. Be a big boy. Put on your big girl panties. It doesn't hurt. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Don't be such a drama queen.
Yeah.
Don't be a sissy. Anytime we're emotional, we're put down, especially negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And over a period of time, the studies show that this destroys the brain. It literally destroys the child's development process. It stops the child's developmental process. There's a guy, a developmental psychologist in Vancouver, Gordon Neufeld, who's just a genius at talking about this stuff. And parents, unwittingly, they can be the most loving parents in the world, but they can unwittingly destroy their children by emotional invalidation. So that by the time the child is 6 or 7, the child is no longer experiencing emotional safety. So what's the child do? The child self-protects by building a wall around. And inside are all these wounded feelings of not being safe, not feeling protected, not feeling loved. On the outside, we build an exterior of confidence and competence and all that stuff. And we carry that into adulthood until we get into stress situations. And then we revert right back to that 6-year-old state. And this is true for just about every human being on the planet. It's the way we are. It's unnecessary, but it's the way it's been for going back thousands of generations, because we haven't known that there are better ways of being with ourselves and with our children than exist right now. What the studies show is that if you start emotionally validating your child as an emotional coach, starting at 2 or 3 years old, by the time they're 12, they're 2 grade levels ahead of their peers. They demonstrate strong emotional resiliency. They demonstrate high emotional intelligence, maturity way beyond their years, all because the parents have properly coached their children on emotional development from 2 to 12 for 10 years.
Critical years.
And here's the thing that's really sad. I have pushed these ideas out to young parents. They have no interest in learning these skills. It's really sad. We could end all prisons, almost all, not quite all, but most. We could end prisons. We could end a lot of crime. We could end a lot of stuff if young parents were taught the skills of how to be emotional coaches to their children and did that work for 10 years. It would make, in 10 or 15 years, you wouldn't recognize our society. It'd be totally different than it is now.
So that brings me back. I find this totally fascinating. And I do a lot of high conflict parenting and divorce situations. And so again, just a lot of anger that's present in the children too. I'm starting a new project trying to deal with that as well. And then also in the workplace. So that brings me back to what you were mentioning earlier, how you developed a strategy and the magic of de-escalating an angry person in 90 seconds or less. And say more about that, and then tie it into your prison project, because I think that's also very fascinating.
The basic skill, I'm now calling it the deep skills, de-escalating emotional people, DEEP, right? DEP is really it's very simple to describe. It's a 3-step process, but it's very counterintuitive and counternormative. So that's why it's different. The first step is you're confronted by an angry person. Maybe it's an angry child, spouse, partner, worker, boss, doesn't matter. They're angry, really angry. First thing you're going to do is ignore their words. It doesn't matter what they say. It's just white noise. You have to make it white noise. You have to ignore those words. And when you do, you free up the bandwidth to do the next 2 steps. And you also are less likely to get triggered. You only get triggered when you associate meaning with words. And that meaning would include insult and disrespect or accusation. And of course, you're going to immediately get reactive and go with the old programming, which would make you defensive or counter-aggressive or whatever. All of it spirals into a conflict. So ignore the words. Second step, you're going to read the emotional data field of this angry person. We all have the innate ability to do this accurately and quickly and efficiently. It's hardwired into us. The reason that we don't use the skill is because of our bias against emotional development caused by 4,000 years of wrong teaching. But we still have that ability. Very briefly, language developed in the hominid, our predecessors, only 230,000 years ago. And our species have been on the planet for over a million years. How did we communicate before language was developed? And language developed as a result of the development of fire, management of fire, which allowed us to render animal fat and change the caloric intake, which then over 25,000 years allowed for a massive expansion of our brain and the hypoglossal muscle and hypoglossal nerves, which can control the larynx and the tongue. And all of a sudden we had the ability to speak, to vocalize. And that was the beginning of symbolic representation. Language is all symbolic. And that created abstract thinking, and everything develops from there. None of that existed before 230,000 years ago. So how did we communicate with each other? in clans and families. It's all emotional data. And so our brains developed very refined abilities to read other people's emotions. And we still have that capacity today. So you read the emotions, and then the third step is that you reflect back the emotions with a you statement. You tell the angry person what they're feeling with the you statement. Now you might be thinking, well, why would I tell somebody what they're feeling? Isn't it obvious to them what they're feeling? And the answer is no, it's not. They are when they're typically very angry, they are in a condition known as alexithymia. Alexithymia is the inability to name your own emotions, to understand, assess, and name your own emotions. Chronic alexithymia is associated with all kinds of disorders, but acute alexithymia is present in almost every intense conflict. And literally what you're doing when you are reflecting back somebody's emotions to them is you're lending them your prefrontal cortex for the 90 seconds it takes for their prefrontal cortex to get back under control. And the brain scanning studies show that when you do this, the emotional centers of the brain are inhibited, they quiet down, and at the same time, the executive function of the brain is activated. And that's what Lieberman's seminal study showed in 2007. And it works every single time without failure. Doesn't matter the culture, doesn't matter anything. There are no variables here because every human brain is hardwired the same way. Yeah, every human brain will respond to this.
Yes. Yes. You know, I happen to teach a cultural competency for a management program at Cal State University here in San Marcos, California. And I looked at the original sort of content that was the prior professor did. And it was like, oh, we have to go way beyond the typical race and ethnicity and all that kind of stuff, because of what I knew about the brain with my own doctoral studies is that it's much more around language and communication styles, which are universal. We're all human beings, right. And it doesn't matter where we have these other cultural influences, but again, we're hardwired the same. And so that's the same kind of messaging that I deliver as well. Yes.
So I developed these skills. I've now got the science to support it. I'm out there teaching and I'm starting to get pushback from people. A lot of it. Nobody likes because basically what I'm doing is I'm challenging the whole edifice of Western culture. Yeah. Saying we are not a rational society. We're not rational beings. We're all emotional beings. It challenges the complete underpinnings of the law and economics. But today, economists, to their credit, have recognized that human beings are not rational beings, that we have what's called bounded rationality. Inside some very narrow guardrails, we can be rational, but we're not in those guardrails, then we're in the emotional domain, which is where most people are most of the time. Law hasn't figured that out yet, and that will be a very slow process. But the whole idea of intention in the law assumes conscious awareness and rationality in human nature, and of course, it's not true. Yeah. There's no science to support that, and there are huge debates going on right now about all of that. Yeah,
I'm well aware of that myself. Just because of what I do as well, and right. People don't want to hear this because it's like you said, it's counter to what they've known all these years. Exactly. Now, there is a concept that you mentioned in your literature that I wanted to make sure that we brought out, and because of how it ties into de-escalating angry person. But say more about listening others into existence.
So the effect of doing these 3 steps, ignoring the words, reading the emotions, and reflecting back the emotions with a simple you statement, has a very profound effect on the speaker. And whether the speaker is angry or not, when you reflect back what somebody's emotional experience is in the moment, they feel safe, deeply safe. First time they felt safe since they were 6 years old, probably. They feel deeply validated. They feel deeply heard. They feel like you really get them. And they are extremely grateful for you taking the time to listen them into existence.
Powerful words, and believe me, I see and hear it, and I know when I work with my clients around similar strategies, but a lot of the main concepts are behind both of our work. We just approach it a little bit differently, but they're just amazed. Oh my God, this was amazing. And we were actually, as I like to say, communicate for conversations, not confrontations, and they're just amazed at how they can actually do that.
Right. So you asked about the prison project. I told you how it started with these 15 women. And our goal was to teach incarcerated people serving long-term and life sentences how to be mediators and peacemakers to stop prison violence. And we started with the women. We were in the women's prison for 2.5 years, and then it was repurposed to a men's prison. And we went into that men's prison, which became Valley State Prison, trained men for 3 years, and then started getting grants from the state of California to go into other prisons. And today we're in 30 prisons around the world. And we've got startups everywhere. And when the pandemic hit, we couldn't go into prisons anymore. Right. So we pivoted, and we took the time to film our entire curriculum using people that we had trained in prison who were serving time in prison. They became our top trainers. They got released on parole. We brought them in, and over a 6-month period last year, we filmed our entire curriculum using them as our primary trainers. And we're just about done with the project, and we'll be able to make Prison of Peace available to any prison in the world.
That is amazing. Interesting enough, when I was teaching law school here at Cal Western in San Diego, 10 to 15 years ago, there was talk about a prison project, and I was asked if I was interested in bringing mediation strategies into the prison. And so maybe there's some similarity around that time, but I know at least that particular project did not get off the ground, and so I never had that opportunity. But the work that you're talking about is just fascinating. I'm curious to let our viewers and listeners know maybe a few more examples of where you've spoken and the kinds of populations that you've reached, and then also how can people learn more about your prison project?
Well, 2 weeks ago, I got on my first commercial flight in 2 years.
Okay.
I flew to Indianapolis and trained 30 or 40 high school or school principals for the Indiana Principal Leadership Institute out of Indiana State University. And I trained them how to de-escalate angry parents and students. And now we're meeting every Friday for an hour. I'm coaching them. They've gone through the workshop, and now I coach them for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And of course, they're getting amazing results and are blown away by this. I've taught in Europe, I've taught in the Middle East, taught in Asia, Indonesia, of course, Canada, United States. And the kinds of people that I've taught, well, obviously people in prison.
Mhm.
And I've taught at the Congressional Budget Office. I've done 2 workshops there teaching senior analysts how to de-escalate members of Congress and staff.
Important skills.
Important skills. I have obviously taught in corporate environments, educational environments. Most of my teaching is online. It's virtual. I'm obviously available for an in-person now that the pandemic's basically passed. I can do in-person workshops now. But a lot of it is online. And of course, again, because of the pandemic and the limitations it imposed, I put a lot of what I teach into online courses.
Mm-hmm.
And if people are interested in learning more about that, I've created a webpage for this audience called, the website is dougnoll.co/conflict mindset, conflict-mindset. Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.co/conflict-mindset. And on that page will be a free ebook that describes everything I've been talking about. You can buy a copy of my 4th book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. You can buy a video course, How to De-Escalate an Angry Person. It's a video course I generated some years ago. And you can also buy my emotional competency courses. These are more deeper courses that if you're really interested in, not only do you learn how to de-escalate people, but you learn how to develop your own emotional competency through a series of skills that I teach in these two different courses. There are various prices, but some free, some not so free.
Yeah.
But
Well,
that page will give you access to my website too. So.
Okay, and we'll make sure we get that as part of our show notes as well. So there are a couple of things here is that, I know many of us are long for that in-person touch, but the people we can now reach through our virtual mediums and our online courses is so incredible. I remember speaking at Stanford back in 2013, and the president at that time was really advocating, distance learning, virtual learning, and just said we can reach the far corners of the world that we could never have reached. And so I'm really excited about that kind of thing. And like you have tried to convert a lot of my stuff online so it's more accessible. And
I do individual and group coaching too, and I do all of that online. Individual coaching on Zoom, and then I do group coaching sessions where a group of no more than 25 come in, and we work on the deep skills, how to de-escalate angry people and how to use these skills. And it's great because you got 25 people from all over the place, all over the world, really. Yeah. And they're all sharing stories about what worked and what didn't work. And then we take those as teaching moments and sort of have them understand why it worked or why it didn't work. We do role plays and practices. In 1 hour, it's a chock full hour, and my students really learn quickly. What I found is that the way I do all of my workshops now is that you do the workshop, which is 6 to 8 hours, either virtual or in person, and then a 4-week follow-up, one Zoom call, 1 hour a week. And for people who've read my book or taken any of my online courses, I offer that follow-up because that's where you really learn. You get the concepts by reading the book or taking the online courses, but you don't develop mastery unless you're being coached. And that's what it's about.
Yeah. Well, like you, I've long believed that follow-up is so critical. Repetition reinforces retention. Where we only learn we only retain a little bit of what we hear at any given time, and we need that repeat exposure to really embed it and to develop it, become unconsciously competent in some new areas.
That's right.
Yeah. We've got your website, and just real quickly, because I I also work a lot with the schools. And so we've talked, we're both have been and are affiliated with Southern California Mediation Association and their programs, Kids Managing Conflict. And so I'm looking forward to bringing that into more schools as well. And that ties then with the counterpart of training principals on how to de-escalate conflict in their school settings. And we certainly know there's a lot of that. And so I want to make sure people are aware of some of the movements, shall we say, that are happening in different directions. You've been doing it in the prisons, and there's so much work to be done in the schools, as well as many other settings and worldwide.
Right. I have a whole program I've set up with schools. So it could be either one charter school or
Okay.
a small district or a large district. I have different programs set up of
Mhm.
different ways of delivering and teaching these skills at various levels in the educational hierarchy.
Mhm.
For example, school board members are dealing with a lot of angry parents right now. So how do you manage school board meetings, and how do you use these de-escalation skills? There's a whole training for school board members, and then there's a whole set of skills for the superintendent level people,
Mhm.
or they're the leaders and the administrators. And then you get to the principal level, and how does a principal use these skills?
Mhm.
And then how do you integrate this into the classroom? How do teachers learn these skills?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then how do you train parents?
Yeah.
And so my programs are all set up to address all of those different audiences in various ways, depending upon what your budget is.
Okay. And is that information also available at the website you shared earlier, dougnoll.co
If
/conflict-mindset?
it's not.
Okay. Okay.
If you're listening and you're interested in learning about the school program, email me at doug@dougnoll.com, DOUG@DOUGNOLL.com. And I'll send you the link to the page on my website where it lays out what that program is.
Okay, wonderful. Well, you'll be hearing from me about that one, okay?
And I will send you the details, and then you can, if you're a school administrator or a school board member and you're interested in thinking about how do I roll this out, then you can see how I lay it out, and then we can have a conversation about what works for you.
Yeah. Well, I'll publicly state that I would be very interested in partnering with you to get it out to more and more schools and getting the word out. So we'll have another conversation about that, and would love to have you back as a guest at some point in the future to talk more about the theoretical and historical perspectives of all this, because you definitely are well researched. I can tell you use that active mind of yours to good ends and have shifted throughout your life. So Doug, I want to say thank you so very much for being here as part of our Decoding the Conflict Mindset, because you certainly have shed a lot of light from a very unique and unexpected perspective, having been a litigator for so many years. So congratulations on your mindset shift.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, listeners, viewers, if you like what you hear, pass it on. Let people know in these various areas that we've talked about, and check into Doug's resources, because you too can grow and shift your mindset and help others around you, and redirect some of this less desirable behavior that we've cultivated over the years. If you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe, because then you'll be notified of every episode coming forth and have access to the recording link. So come on back, Dr. Deborah Dupree, the Mindset Doc, Decoding the Conflict Mindset.